thanks for joining me. This is going to be my long-promised series that I was going to do about many topics dealing with the first century and the literature therein. So let's get into it. We're gonna kind of get into the First Temple period a little bit real quick and talk about it. The First Temple period was established under King Solomon around the year 1000 BC. It really experienced its first upheaval by the Assyrians in the year 735 through 701. And then they had of course, the famous Nebuchadnezzar exile into Babylon for 40 years. And then the temple was reestablished under the Zerubbabel line by Cyrus, bringing them back. And you can find this in Isaiah 44:28 in the year 540 BC. And Zerubbabel literally means shoot of David out of Babylon, Bavel, meaning Babylon. And so you have this reestablishment of Zerubbabel there. You have, of course, the famous Ezra and Nehemiah and so forth. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many of these terms. And then we're going to move on into, later on we have this famous upheaval by the Seleucid Empire, which is the Greeks. And after that upheaval, the Seleucids are very violent. Antiochus Epiphanes was very violent, very much tried to what was called Hellenize the Jews. Now this term Hellenize is going to be used throughout this series, and so get used to hearing this. This term is really meaning to make something Greek, to erase the culture and to replace it with Greco-Roman culture. And so that was what Antiochus Epiphanes really sought to do in Israel, was to ban the practice of Judaism throughout the land and instill Greco-Roman sort of ideologies, and the banning of circumcision, the banning of eating kosher foods, forcing people to eat pork. They literally brought pigs into the temple and sacrificed them on the temple altars in order to insult and incite the Jews. They forced people into playing in little arenas to play sports and to do all these things. A lot of people don't know that the story of Hanukkah is really built around this period, and the uprising of the Maccabees, the priestly Maccabees, who came to restore the temple and to restore the Jews back to their homeland, and to push out these invaders and to regain their culture again. And you get this, these stories about, the lamp that stayed lit for 8 days, of the oil. They had the Aron Kodesh, where it's called the Ark, basically, where the Torah scrolls would be kept. Above it is the Ner Tamid, which is a lamp that is constantly lit, and it burns off of this oil. And they found enough oil that would maybe last a day. And they went ahead and lit it, and they got to work making oil. But it takes quite a bit of time to make some oil. And by the time they were able to make oil 8 days later, the Ner Tamid was miraculously still lit, and they were able to replace it. And this miracle is recounted and celebrated every year on Hanukkah. With the lighting of the 8-candled menorah or candelabrum called a Chanukiah. It's actually different than a regular menorah, which is a 7-candled stick menorah. the menorah for Hanukkah is an 8 candlestick. So, little fun fact for you there. And also the game of playing the dreidel comes from this time period when the soldiers of the Greeks would be walking around making sure that everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing. The men would hide their daily Torah study with each other by pretending to play this gambling game called the dreidel, and they would sit there and someone would read the parsha, the weekly Torah portion, and they would study together, or maybe even pray together in a quorum somehow. And if a soldier walked by, it would seem innocuous because they were simply playing this gambling game. And so that's why also every year during Hanukkah, children play the dreidel game to recount how much the Jewish people suffered in trying to maintain their culture and not be forced into this assimilationist way of life. And so a lot of what is going on in the struggles of these periods moving on into the first century is the struggle from the separation from Jewish principles into Hellenization. And we'll see that theme sort of played out as we go along here. So let's talk about Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, really nothing's mentioned about his genealogy in 1 Chronicles 3:24, which is really the last genealogy we get before we enter into this period that we're talking about. Although one of his descendants that is mentioned is a person named Anani, and Anani, whose name actually literally means the cloudy one. He is mentioned in the genealogies in the New Testament. He's also mentioned by Julius Africanus, who was an early church father in the first century, who gives his own genealogies, but he believes that Jesus' genealogies were sort of created by the Jesus family, who had separated into 2 cities across the Jordan into Damascus. But that's another deeper topic to discuss. So let's talk about the Sadducees, or the sons of Zadok. Sons of Zadok. Zadok was a high priest under David and Solomon's period. And a lot of people, there's a lot of controversy around these Zadokites, or these sons of Zadok, the Zaduki, aka the Sadducees. In the Talmud and the what would be the writings of the Pharisaic tradition, the Sadducees are categorically lumped in with the groups of minim, meaning those who do not accept the rabbinic authorities of the Pharisaic tradition. To these traditions of following the traditions of the elders that were established in Babel, and you find this in what's called the Talmud. A lot of this is codified in different ways. You have the Shulchan Aruch, and Shulchan Aruch was created much later. But you have, even other forms of Talmud, like Talmud Yerushalmi, which is the Jerusalem Talmud. And this is just codifying the halacha, the Jewish laws that were given down in the Torah, sort of breaking it down in layman's terms of how does this practically applied. And there was a lot of debate that would go on between these Zadokites who did not believe in an oral tradition because they saw a lot of what the Pharisees were doing as additions. And these Pharisees actually, it's argued sometimes, could be considered a group of priests who broke off during the Maccabean period during the fights with the Seleucids, who had broken off and actually had become more of assimilationists with the Greeks and sort of worked with the Greeks. And this term, parshim, or those who separate themselves, the Pharisees, those who separate themselves, could actually mean those who separated themselves from the Maccabees, from the real revolt, and aligned themselves closely with the Roman or the Greek authorities. And we can kind of see this also play out later on in the first century, when the Sadducees, there's the establishment Sadducees, who worked in the temple and you had the wilderness Sadducees, who didn't stand at all for the establishment Sadducees, who were close to the Romans, who were close to the Herods. And we're going to really get into depth about why this was. Why was there such a split between the Pharisees versus the Sadducees? Sorry, my spelling is terrible. What was going on here? Why was there such a split here? And what is sort of the political aspects of what's going on? So first, in order to even get into that, we have to talk about the Herods. So let's do that now. Okay, so let's talk about the Herods, also known as the Herodians. We're going to start with Antipas. Coming down his line. We're going to come over to Antipater. Who marries Cypros. Now these are going to be the seniors, the first, on their side. Because there is another Antipater and Cypros later down the line. Over here we're going to have Salome, which you might be familiar with. Salome, she danced before Herod and so on. She is the one responsible for getting John the Baptist beheaded and so on. Okay, now we're going to come down from there. And we have Herod the Great. I'm going to put that in lowercase g. Plus Cleopatra. And then he also married, we'll go plus Malthace plus Mariamne, we'll say Mary for short, plus another Mary, Mariamne. He was married to two Marys. And there's an interesting story behind that as well, because, well, we'll have to come over from here, from Herod the Great, where you have another Salome, who marries old Joseph, old Joey Joe. And here's an interesting story behind that, because Mary and Joseph are killed in 29 BC when Herod the Great goes and gets deposed by the Caesar in Rome. And while he's gone, he puts Mary in the care of Joseph to be watched by him. And when Herod comes back, he finds that his wife is pregnant. And his wife has this elaborate story about having the angel Gabriel come to her and tell her that she is going to bear the second coming of Elijah. Herod, not too interested in hearing stories of messianism or his throne being taken from him, or stories about his wife being impregnated, be it divinely or not. Wasn't very pleased by this, and so he orders Mary and Joey to be killed in 29 BC. And some people will argue that this may be the origins of the idea of the story of Joseph and Mary, which creeps into the Gospels later. And the reason why they might posit this, or the reason why there might even be some validity to this, is that in the first Gospel, chronologically speaking, which is Mark is the first of the Gospels that is really written and is circulated among the early Christians. And in the book of Mark, there is absolutely no infancy narrative for the story of Jesus. There's absolutely nothing in there about a virgin birth or an angel coming to Mary or any of this. For some reason, we're supposed to believe that the writer of the book of Mark, the original book that's being circulated, just didn't find it important enough to mention. I would posit that this idea is put in later by another character that we're going to talk about here in a moment. So I'm going to erase this so that we can sort of move it up a little bit, because we have some more characters here to discuss. Okay, so moving on, we'll go back to Herod the Great, lowercase g. And we're going to come down. He begat, as they say, Faisal, who was married to Costobarus. Okay, and Costobarus comes down here and has Antipater the second, who marries Cypros the second. Now, you're wondering what's going on here. There's a lot of incest that was going on within the Herod dynasty, and this is also vehemently spoken against by the Dead Sea Scrolls community. The Essenes absolutely could not stand the Herods because of their sexual improprieties with incest and so on and so forth. Okay, so excuse me. Also, Antipater has a sister named Bernice. And over here, well, coming down, Cypros also and Antipater have children as well, and we will get into them. But over here, there was another daughter that we do not know the name of. She is a mystery person. So, moving on. This is where things get a little important, where things get a little interesting. Antipater and Cypros begot, as they say, Costobarus. Okay, the second. And over here they begat Costobarus II, Saul, and Cypros III. Okay. Now, what's very, very interesting here is that Antipater is the governor of an area known as Tarsus. Okay. So we have a governor of Tarsus named Antipater who has a son named Saul. Why is this important? Well, I'll tell you. Saul is the name originally of a character that creeps up in the New Testament named Paul. And Paul is a self-admitted Herodian. He's a self-admitted member of the Herod dynasty. What? What do you mean, Chas? Excuse me, my hiccups. Paul in Romans 16, verse 10 and 11 gives us a very shocking revelation that he is a member of the Herod dynasty when he calls the littlest Herod, aka Herod of Chalcis, his cousin. They're kinsmen, they're brethren, they're cousins. Okay, well, that would make perfect sense, because if he is Saul, Antipater's son, raised in Tarsus, and Paul claims that he was raised in Tarsus and was trained in Talmud, or trained in Torah by Rabbi Gamaliel, and we know that Antipater had his children taught Talmud Torah by the Talmidim of Rabbi Gamaliel, that this all sort of fits together. You know, when you study the writings of Josephus and you sort of get this history behind these people, the dots start to become connected. Because it makes perfect sense why Paul/Saul is able to navigate through Roman circles so easily. You have this situation where Paul is confronted by James, the brother of Jesus, when James tells him, you know, the people here, they've heard about you, and they hear that you teach the Jews who live among the Gentiles to forsake the law of Moses, not to circumcise their children, and to live according to our customs. This is what you should do. Take these 4 men, be at rights with them, shave your head, okay, go pay for their rights, and so that everyone will see that thou walkest orderly and keepest the law. This was very important to James, the brother of Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus, wasn't saying, no, we need to get away from doing the law that's been done away with. No. He's saying, no, we need to be staying on it. And they've heard that you're teaching against it. So you need to prove them wrong if you're really one of us and go down here and do this thing. And Paul agrees, and he goes down to the temple. And while he goes down there, people recognize him. And they go, oh, here's that man, the enemy man, who preaches against us. You know, and they rise up to kill him. And he gives this famous big speech on the steps about how he was the Pharisee of Pharisees. He was the Jewiest Jew who ever Jewed it. And, you know, the Romans drag him in after the crowd is, upset, and the Romans are beating him. You know, why are you upsetting the crowd? And he says, is this how you treat a Roman citizen? Now that's huge. Huge. Because if Saul/Paul is a Herod, it would make perfect sense why he has dual citizenship. Because the Herods were unequivocally given dual citizenship by the Romans. Because they were so close with them. And the Romans had this mission. We want the Jews to abandon this Torah, to abandon this Jewish law, to abandon these Jewish customs, and Hellenize themselves, Greco-Romanize themselves, and become like us. And a lot of what Saul/Paul is writing in his letters is a departure from the Torah, a departure from keeping the law, and really adopting, this bowing down to the Roman authority. Read for yourself in Romans chapter 13. The whole chapter from beginning to end, starting from verse 1. It's very much an appeal to the people to submit themselves wholeheartedly to the Roman authority, no matter what they tell you to do. Now, Paul having dual citizenship is a very big deal. Why? Because the Romans required something for dual citizenship. They required that a citizen of Rome bow down to statues of the Caesar. And they believed that Caesar was divine, was a god. In fact, they believed that the Caesar was a son of a god, born to a virgin. This was extremely important to the Romans. Anyone who was considered of any importance, who was considered divine in any way, had to meet this very special criteria of being born to a virgin and son of a god. And so, like I said earlier, this idea where Mary and Joseph, the wife Mary of King Herod, who was killed for her impropriety, and her story about having a miraculous conception and all of this stuff may have been, inserted into the gospel narrative by this Saul character. Now, it's also worth mentioning that, what happens after Paul is arrested? Well, his nephew somehow is able to navigate himself through the garrison to a high general official of the army and warn them that the Jews are planning to kill Paul. And so how does he respond? Well, he responds with a escort that can be only described as presidential. I mean, it's just massive. 200 some soldiers, so many horsemen and spearmen, and all of these hundreds of people go to transport Paul from the prison garrison to be held prisoner where? In the personal quarters of Herod. So let's break this down in terms of today. I want you to imagine that Donald Trump, he's running for re-election, and the Bidens aren't going to have it, so they have him killed. They send someone out and they have him assassinated. And so let's say, for the sake of posterity, for the sake of the story, that he rises from the dead, okay, and he goes off into heaven, and his new movement is now being led by, well, it wouldn't be his brother, because I believe Donald Trump's brother's passed away, but let's say his son. Trump Jr. is now running the movement, and this is going to be represented as James, the brother of Jesus, okay? And obviously Trump is being represented here in this analogy as Jesus, okay? So James or Trump Jr. is now running the movement, and there is sent an agent to go assassinate and kill him. And this agent is on his flight and on his way there. And on his way there, he sees a big flashing light, and he has this message from Donald Trump that comes to him. And so he gets on YouTube and on online, and he starts telling people, listen, I was the enemy of these Trumpers, and I was going to come and assassinate Trump Jr., and I was going to do all these horrible things, but you know what? A flash of light came to me, and Trump came to me in his vision, and he told me that I needed to go and stop persecuting him and to spread this new message that he wants the world to know. And this new message that Donald Trump wants us all to know is that he wants open borders. Let them flood in as much as possible. Ban guns. All the guns should be banned. Full-blown communism. Ban this whole capitalistic nonsense. No one's ever allowed to earn a penny. Anything that you make is property of everyone else. Oh man, let me tell you, he wants abortions, mandatory abortions. Oh, he just everything the opposite of the way that Donald Trump had preached when he was alive. Because that's exactly what we see from Paul. Paul's teaching the opposite of what Jesus taught. Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 5, do not say that I came to do away with the law. No, but to fulfill it. Okay? Because not one jot nor one little tittle, that's not even one little yod from the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, not even one yod will be done away with from the law, lest heaven and earth should be done away with. Okay? And he says, if someone among you should start to teach you to forsake even the least of these laws, he will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But if they should teach you to keep even the least of these laws, he will be called the most in the kingdom of heaven. So Paul comes on the scene saying, no, Jesus came to do away with the law. Jesus saying, no, I didn't. He's saying the opposite. And so imagine that this person, this agent says, no, I was out to kill Don Jr., and then I had this vision, and now Trump wants everything the opposite of what he said. Oh, and by the way, I'm Joe Biden's cousin. Yeah, I'm Joe Biden's cousin, and we're very close. All my really close friends are within the Biden circle, or the big high upper elites that are big lefty elites. And so, this message that I have has nothing to do with that and that association whatsoever. No. This is a real message that Donald Trump came to me with. Would you believe such a person?
Paul's message, which he said was given to him by Jesus,
a very important guy, calls himself the angel,
seems to completely contradict what the Jesus of history taught and said.
Maybe a diagram will help.
He emphasized circumcision, respecting the Sabbath, keeping Passover, and maintaining a kosher diet. But Paul heard a very different message.
I'm a reformed man.
In his version, you didn't have to circumcise. You didn't have to follow a kosher diet. And he canceled all the Jewish holidays. Why was Paul so off message?
Even angels can get their wings clipped.
You got the scissors?
And then there's the big one. Jesus said, I come not to bring peace on earth, but the sword. But Paul never hung out with revolutionaries. More than this, Paul seemed to be very comfortable with the Romans. James and his gang weren't buying Paul's approach.
Thanks, friend. Friend to a Roman.
And since Jerusalem was James's turf, Paul took his brand new message and hit the road. Historian Rosemary Sheldon thinks the facts point to Paul the Roman citizen becoming Paul the Roman spy.
Is the story as told in Acts plausible? Visions can be had and conversions can be done, but an historian does not deal in miracles. An historian has to deal in facts. And so we looked at the story and we said, okay, what could the alternative be? A man acting in this manner. What might Paul be doing other than preaching? And that's where the undercover part came. That if you look at the possibility that he was an intelligence officer, it all makes complete sense. And it's much more logical, and no miracles are required to reconcile that kind of story.
Before we go accusing anybody of being a spy, let alone one of the fathers of Christianity, we'll need to know what to look for. I'm off to travel in the footsteps of Paul, and I've asked Rosemary Sheldon to tell us how to spy on a spy.
Watch what he does. You see his actions, not necessarily his words. See who he associates with. Paul is always surrounded by Roman officers, Roman governors, people of wealth. Certainly a spy has to take on many identities, not just a change of a name, but it could be the change of your appearance. You have to be able to move between one milieu and the next. Those are good skills to have if you're in the intelligence business.
Paul could move through many worlds, like a spy. In fact, no one was better at it in his day than Paul. Maybe at Ephesus he delivered his famous lines.
To the Jews, I pretend to be a Jew. To those who observe the Jewish law, I pretend to be observant. To those who are not observant, I say, I'm not observant. To the weak, I pretend to be weak. I have become all things to all men.
A man of many faces, indeed.